you, Ed. It's an honor to be here today. And I want to thank Ed Barrett for inviting me, and Mitt Reagan for working with the Georgetown Law Center to help me participate in a panel discussion last night, and to both for accommodating my rather hectic schedule. I also want to say, to give a deep thanks already to the speakers who preceded me, because you've made some really interesting points that I hope to piggyback on as I give this presentation, which I think is going to be very boring for most of you. And it's going to be a review of some ethical theory. So this thing has already gone blank. Okay, we're good. Yes, stay close. Yeah, this is why I'm not in combat, right? I'm not good with the buttons. So I want to thank the speakers who went before me, and I want to thank the midshipmen who are here. How many of you are the midshipmen? Who are you? Identify yourselves. Good. Okay, now philosophers, this is going to be pretty much a review. Okay, so philosophers, take a nap. All right, the rest of you, be at attention. Okay, so I want to give a shout out to someone whose work has influenced my thinking about military ethics. My thinking about military ethics and moral injury has not been terribly deep. I'm sort of a bread and butter virtue ethicist, right? But I want to give a shout out here to Professor Nancy Sherman. She's in the back somewhere. Stand up and wave. This woman's work is really tremendous. So everything that you see in her biography, buy that book now and read it. It'll be very helpful for you. And I also want to say that I am the philosopher half of the warrior philosopher. I haven't served in the military. I haven't been in combat. Some members of my family have. I'm able to do what I do because of the service of others, and for that I'm grateful too. So what I'm going to give you today, and Mitt and Ed, you have heard some of this. Ed, I think you're going to be terrified to know that I'm going to step outside the box a little bit here. You're okay with that? Good. Okay, so my opening remarks, I already told you what an honor it is. And Ed has shared with me the syllabus for the course that you're teaching, which is really quite tremendous. And I'm going to be speaking on moral virtue. So I'm going to attempt to expand your knowledge base here by giving an all too brief tour of what I take to be the most important developments in contemporary virtue ethics, and make some comments on its potential applications to military formation. So I might say one or two words about moral injury, but mainly I'll be making some observations about military formation. Do you think I could have a microphone so I can wander around? You got it? Oh, here it is. Okay. Thank you. All right, good. Put my glasses down here. Don't take them. You've got my glasses there, bud. No. Nice try. You got to watch them every minute. Okay, so now here's a bit of 20th century history. Ed mentioned Elizabeth Anscombe. So modern moral philosophy, philosophers, you know this, started in 1958. In this article, she laments the state of philosophical psychology, critiques deontology and consequentialism, and points toward Aristotle for guidance. This is the beginning of the early turn toward virtue ethics. How many of you know what deontology and consequentialism are? I do not see midshipmen's hands raising. Hello? Okay. Deontology is rule-oriented ethics. Consequentialism tells us that the moral worth of an action depends upon the consequences that it produces. Virtue ethics is different. Virtue ethics focuses on character. And so Anscombe was the beginning, and then Philippa Foot, who wrote from the 1970s to the 2000s, also took up the idea of the virtues. And she did this in several books, Virtues and Vices and Other Essays in Moral Philosophy, and Natural Goodness in 2001. She had the idea that virtues, and this comes from Aristotle, you can find this in the Nicomachean Ethics too, but Foot had the idea that virtues are correctives. Okay, so we naturally tend to be cowardly. Courage is a corrective. Some of us might tend to be rash. We're too impulsive, too gung-ho. Courage pulls us back to a mean state. And so we get there the classic idea that virtue is an intermediate state between vices of excess, too much of something, and deficiency, which is too little. If you have questions, just let me know. I'll be happy to duck or ignore them. Actually, that's not true. I will try to answer. Okay. So Iris Murdoch in The Sovereignty of Good also had a concern with virtue, and she was inspired by Plato. Plato actually wrote before Aristotle, as I'm sure you know, but Murdoch thought that we have sensitivities to goodness. John McDowell, another very interesting philosopher who has written from the 1970s to the present, has a distinctive form of neo-Aristotelianism, according to which virtue is a form of sensitivity. McDowell studied with Murdoch. There were some influences there. Okay, 20th century history continued. Now, some of you may have heard of Alasdair MacIntyre, who wrote the book After Virtue. Virtue is contextualized within practices and traditions. The virtues are those dispositions which not only sustain practices and enable us to achieve the goods internal to them, but also sustain us in a certain kind of quest for the good. How many of you think this might have applicability to practices of the military, to the traditions of the military, to what it means to be a good military servant leader? So there are some ideas here that I think are worth mining for your thinking about virtue and military ethics. Linda Zagzebski, who is my colleague at the University of Oklahoma, wrote in 1996, Virtues of the Mind, an inquiry into the nature of virtue and the ethical foundations of knowledge. She defines virtue as a deep and enduring acquired excellence of a person, involving a characteristic motivation to produce a certain end, desired end, and reliable success in bringing about that end. Again, it's very much like Aristotle. So many of the philosophers who are contemporary people have been influenced by the classic philosophers. Rosalind Hursthouse in 1999 wrote on virtue ethics, and this was the advent of virtue ethics as a theoretical alternative to consequentialism and deontology. Would you be okay, Ed, with making this PowerPoint available to anyone who wants it? Great. Okay. I see some of you taking notes, and you can certainly have access to the PowerPoint. So other important 20th century contributors, Georg Henrik von Wright, Varieties of Goodness, 1963. He had a chapter in that book. James D. Wallace, Virtues and Vices. Edmund Pinkoff's Quandaries and Virtues Against Reductivism and Ethics. And in a moment of shameless self-promotion, which I'll do several times, okay, I want to refer you to the Oxford Handbook of Virtue Ethics, which I edited, and to the article by my former professor, William Solomon, on early virtue ethics in the 20th century. So here's a caveat. Okay? There are three broad conceptualizations of virtue in the philosophical literature on virtue. First is that virtue is a trait or disposition. Just about everybody who writes on virtue holds that view. Okay? Midshipman, did I mention there's going to be a quiz after the presentation? Okay. You think I jest. Okay, virtue as a sensitivity we find in the work of Iris Murdoch and John McDowell. Virtue as a skill we find in the work of Matt Stichter and Dan Jacobson. And Stichter has just published a book. It came out in 2018 on this. Again, there are articles in the Oxford Handbook that you can take a look at. And unless otherwise noted, here I'm talking about virtue as a trait or a disposition. Okay? Now, I do have to introduce some technical distinctions to you. One is a distinction between virtue ethics and virtue theory. Okay? The distinction, I believe, was introduced in an article by Julia Driver and then taken up rather widely in the literature. So virtue theory refers to articulations of virtue within larger ethical theory types, like consequentialism and deontology. Okay, so Kant had a theory of what virtue is. Consequentialists have theories of what virtue is. Again, I'm doing more shameless self-promotion here, but you can look in the Oxford Handbook if you want more information about this. Okay? But virtue ethics really took off in 1999 with the publication of Hurstouse's book, in which she tried to articulate a version of virtue ethics as an alternative to larger ethical theory types. okay? And what that meant was that she took virtue as a fundamental or primary concept and then sought to derive or show how other ethical concepts, such as what is right, okay, and good consequences, can be situated vis-a-vis that fundamental concept of virtue. Okay, everybody with me? Okay, let me know if you're not. I'm used to it. You know, I've been teaching for 30 plus years. I can deal with blank stares, not very well, but I have been known to interrupt classes when I'm thinking people are not paying attention to me. Okay. So now there are two main categories of virtue ethics: Neo-Aristotelianism and everything else. Okay. Okay. Right? So, and I say this because Neo-Aristotelianism, I think, is the dominant strand of virtue ethics. And we do have other philosophers here who might challenge me on that idea, but bear in mind that I'm right. Okay? So, Aristotle, of course, wrote the Nicomachean Ethics, and then Hursthouse wrote on virtue ethics in 1999. Dan Russell has written Practical Intelligence and the Virtues in 2009. Julia Annis, Intelligent Virtue in 2001, and Christian Christensen, Virtuous Emotions in 2018. Now, these are really not examples of historical scholarship. Okay, so if you want great historical scholarship on Aristotle, look at Nancy Sherman's books. Okay, Nance, where are you? So there are a couple of them in that biography that are tremendous, okay? So everything else in terms of virtue ethics, Linda Zagzebski has agent basing, Sloat in an early work has agent basing, Christine Swanton has pluralistic virtue, and so on and so forth. In the original presentation, I had 71 slides. And Ed emailed me and said, have mercy, okay? And I thought, oh, Ed. So I took some of these out and I did some other things. So anyway, we will take a look at some of these things. And again, you know, more shameless self-promotion. We'll just go through that. So let's look at some definitions of virtue, okay? Aristotle's definition of virtue from the Terence Irwin translation of the Nicomachean Ethics goes like this. Virtue is a state that decides, consisting in a mean, the mean relative to us, which is defined by reference to reason. That is, by reference to the reason, by reference to which an intelligent person would define it. It's excitement of the ideas. Okay. It is a mean between two vices, one of excess and one of deficiency. Did y'all get that? Okay, yeah. All right. A nice reconstruction from Christensen, quoted in Christensen, is virtue, arete, and this is the Greek word, arete. It means excellence, okay? Virtue is that sort of active disposition which sets a person to act or react in a mean to situations involving choice, following reason, as a person of practical wisdom does in matters concerning pathe, which is emotions, and actions, right? Okay? Very theoretical, but I'm going to make it practical soon, I hope. Couple more definitions. Kant defines virtue as a kind of strength and resoluteness of will to resist and overcome obstacles that oppose fulfilling our moral duties. So, does this have any relevance to you in the military? Yeah, I do see signs of life among midshipmen. I see some heads nodding. You nodded, sir. Good job, good job. What is it? Do you see a relevance? Good for you. Excellent. You've got to encourage this sort of thing among the youth. Okay. So, some consequentialist definitions of virtue. Maximizing virtue consequentialism. A character trait is a virtue if and only if its consequences are at least as good as any alternative character trait. There are a couple of others. Scalar virtue consequentialism. One character trait is more of a virtue vice than another if it has better or worse consequences. And then Julia Driver's version of virtue consequentialism. She's a contemporary philosopher. A trait is a virtue if and only if it has, on balance, good consequences. And I don't know how much you want to do with that in your course. Nothing. Okay. Moving right along. Right, so we're going to do a deeper dive into Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Because you know what? I cannot stand superficiality. Okay. We're doing the deep dive now. Virtues of character and virtues of thought feature in the Nicomachean ethics. So virtues of character are entrenched dispositions. And as somebody earlier said, I think it might have been your superintendent who knew this, we're not by nature virtuous or vicious, according to Aristotle. We can go either way. Okay? We have the capacity to be virtuous or vicious, and virtues of character are acquired through guided practice or habituation. And I cannot tell you how important military education and training is in this scheme of things. I mean, the guided practice and habituation offered by the military has tremendous potential for forming the character of young people. So looking back to Aristotle's definition, I just repeat it here, okay? But this really gets at the idea that if you are a virtuous person, you will be able to discern the right action to do in any sort of situation because you have an entrenched character trait. If you have formed courage or generosity, you are well situated to make the correct choice in decisions concerning courageous or generous actions. Okay? And that's not an accident. Okay? It's because along with the virtues and part of virtues and required by virtue, you have developed phronesis. It's a Greek word for practical wisdom. Okay? So phronesis is this capacity to discern what it's good or right to do in any particular situation. The story of the MiG fighter pilots, to me, is an example of phronesis. And this is an example of 25-year-old young men, right? Your superintendent was young when this occurred. And yet, these two pilots made the right decision. To me, that was phronesis, okay? And that wasn't an accident. It was because they had developed that habit. The general this morning gave an example of was it Lance Corporal? The Lance Corporal, who could have killed a number of civilians but chose not to. And he lost his life in the process. That, too, was phronesis. And this, to me, illustrates something else that we might see in a moment. And that is that there are some situations from which a virtuous agent will either not escape alive or will not escape with her life unmarred. And that goes to the issue of moral injury. Sometimes, in choosing the right thing to do, you will incur moral injury. You will have to make a terrible decision. These are what Rosalind Hursthouse calls tragic dilemmas. Okay? There may be a reason. The balance of reasons may favor one choice over the other, but they are both bad. Okay? They are both choices that will result in some sort of tragedy. And the person who is forced to make those choices will bear a moral burden. Okay? And that's where things like the military institution, things like camaraderie, things like the support that soldiers and sailors and other military personnel can find within their units from their chaplains, okay, can make a really big difference. Now, unity of the virtues is an ancient thesis. It's an ancient thesis that we find in Plato, in Aristotle, in different forms. There has been a lot of ink spilled by philosophers over this. And the idea here from Aristotle is that you cannot have any virtue unless you have them all. And that's because of it's hard. I know, somebody's giving me a skeptical look here. I said, yes, I get it. It's a hard thesis, okay? But it's premised on phronesis, which is a sort of unifying virtue that sort of pulls everything together, okay? But it seems very unreasonable. And it seems very counterintuitive, right? I know a lot of people who are generous, but not necessarily courageous, right? And it seems elitist and harsh to say, well, you don't have any virtue, right? You don't have them all, so you can't have any of them, all right? And I think, well, no. But there is something about that thesis that is worth thinking about deeply. And I say this because, to put it bluntly, Aristotle was not a dumb man. He was not a dumb man. Plato was not a dumb man. They're not stupid people. They had something in mind here that's important. And I want to suggest to you that what they thought was important was the integration of character, the integration of virtues into a character that is consistent, that's holistic. That's what you want, right? You want somebody who is going to be trained up that way so that the courageous person is also kind and just. It is a very demanding ideal. But the military is in the business of being demanding. Okay? So we have several roles for phronesis here, and one is that it is internal to each virtue, right? So if I have to make a decision involving generosity, for example, how is that going to work? How will that work? When is your birthday? Chaplain, I bet you.
August 27th.
August 27th. Thank you. Laura, may I call you Laura? Laura, what do you like? What do you want for your birthday, Laura?
Oh, running up a mountain.
Good Lord. Okay. You want to run up a mountain for your birthday. That's incredible. All right, then. I'm going to recover here in a minute. But really, Laura, seriously, if I'm your friend and I'm generous, and you tell me, I really want to run up a mountain for my birthday, what am I going to give you?
Your time.
Wrong.
You mean like a physical gift?
Yeah.
Oh, a homemade birthday cake. For post-run.
Oh, all right, post-run. Post-run, I can, whoops. All right, I'm good. Okay, post-run. Now I can relate. Now I got it. I'm thinking, I'll get you running shoes. But of course, you're an accomplished runner. You don't need running shoes. So I'm thinking, well, I will not get you a tiara, right? I will not get you something that you don't want or need. The generous person uses phronesis, practical wisdom, to figure out what the right response is. Thank you for being a good sport. Okay, this is what happens to the people who are unfortunate enough to sit right in the front. Okay, but so the idea is, if I'm compassionate, if I'm generous, then my choice of action will be informed by practical wisdom. Okay, if I'm truly virtuous. Similarly, right, if I have to choose between a just action and a merciful action, and this is sort of like the paradigm case, right, of conflict, then phronesis is supposed to help me adjudicate those conflicts. Okay? It's also supposed to help me regulate the virtues and keep them in check. So, there's all kinds of controversy about just what phronesis does. There could be a third possibility here. Emotion regulation is part of phronesis. So, we'll just say Laura has phronesis. Okay. And it's her birthday. And she's run up the mountain. And I've given her a cake. Okay. Is she going to be wildly enthusiastic about the cake? You are. Okay. How enthusiastic are you going to be?
I'm going to tell everyone about it.
You're going to tell everyone about it. Okay. What if the cake tastes terrible? Which it will, because I'm making it.
I would still say thank you.
You would say thank you. Okay. How deeply disappointed will you be?
If it doesn't taste good?
Yeah.
I'll still be honored that you made it.
That's phronesis. That's emotion regulation. Okay? So when Laura, who is wildly enthusiastic about her cake, after running down the mountain, tastes it and it tastes horrible, she isn't going to go into a deep depression. She isn't going to be completely messed up for the rest of her life. Can you see that emotion regulation has some relevance for the military? You will have to do really hard things, midshipmen. You will have very difficult decisions to make. You need to protect yourself against the bitter slings and arrows of fate. You need to make sure that your emotions are appropriately regulated. Okay? And this is hard in today's world because we tend toward emotivity. Okay? We have smiley faces all over. all right? Okay. We have little emojicons or whatever to express our deepest moral sentiments. Something tells me we got to pare this back, okay? Right? So a possible fourth role for phronesis is that it gives you a blueprint or a conception of your moral identity. Now, I was going to talk about grand end views, but I don't think I will. Who has a blueprint of your life? How old are you, midshipmen?
22.
Oh, good Lord. I have sweaters older than you are. The old one. All right there. Hello. Hi. Hi. Hi, Kenneth. Ken. Hello, ma'am. I love it. Do you have a blueprint for your life?
No.
See, I'm 60. You wouldn't have thought it, would you? Just say no. Thank you. And I still don't have a blueprint for my life. And looking over my life, I don't think there's a coherent blueprint to be found. But that's just me being skeptical about the blueprint view. Maybe other people who have their stuff together have a blueprint. I've never had my stuff together. But part of the issue here is that sometimes life presents circumstances that kind of make it the case that you're not going to be able to have a blueprint, right? That doesn't mean you can't react well. That doesn't mean you can't handle situations well. It just means that if you have a plan and it's disrupted, don't freak out. Okay? And that's a rough paraphrase from Aristotle, okay? Don't freak out that if you are virtuous, you have phronesis, okay? And that's going to help you. And you have strong character. And you don't get that alone. You don't get it in a vacuum. You have to have good friends. You have to have good comrades, okay? Everybody with me? Thank you, Kenneth. He's just kind of putting his finger in his collar there to try to, okay. All right. Virtue-relevant states. Now, this is a little bit more of Aristotle. Do you want to go through this, Ed? Just shake your... Briefly. Oh, briefly. No, I'm just going to... Virtue, sorry. I don't know. I don't know why I bother to ask you these things. See, why ask him if you're going to ignore him, right? Okay, so virtue and eudaimonia. Okay, flourishing, right? Eudaimonia is flourishing. So virtue, according to Aristotle, was necessary but not sufficient for flourishing. That means it's not enough. Okay, so, the institute that I direct, we do outreach, education outreach. And what we try to do is to cultivate virtue in school children. Okay, so we assist teachers and mentors in developing tools and curriculum and that sort of thing. But I do come from Oklahoma, and there's deep poverty in Oklahoma. And you can do as much as you want in educating for virtue, but if the child does not live in a safe environment, is hungry, comes to school with head lice, as they do, is poorly clothed, does not have adequate health care, doesn't have adequate dental care, which is a big issue, okay, then they're not going to flourish. So you can try to be as virtuous as possible, but if you lack those external goods, then in our day and age, you're not going to flourish. And contrast this with the Stoics, who thought that virtue was both necessary and sufficient for flourishing. So that, even if you didn't have those things, you could flourish. Now, I think this is a really big issue in our day and age because we're trying to educate the younger generation to become virtuous. But if the circumstances are stacked against them, as they are for many youngsters, then I think we've got a real problem. Now, I'm going to skip ethical naturalism here. Crucial ambiguities, no, we don't need those. Okay, so neo-Aristotelianism, this is a nice definition, I think. Virtue is an entrenched disposition of character that produces appropriately motivated action guided by reason. Virtuous actions are manifested in a wide range of types of situations, calling for virtuous action. That is, virtuous behavior is cross-situationally consistent. I think Professor Doris will probably challenge that in his next talk, but remember, I'm right. Okay. Sorry, John. Are you okay? Oh, good.
I haven't sorted out in advance.
I thought I'd give you fair warning. You know, this is like, I don't know, something like the MiG releasing the the tank or something. I have no idea. Trying to find a military metaphor here and not doing very well. Okay, warning shot across the bow, maybe. Okay. So here we go, right? One thing I really want to point out to you about this definition is the importance of appropriate motivation for virtue. Okay? So somebody give me an example of that. I'm looking at midshipmen here. Oh, you're just moving. Right, okay. It's like an auction. You move and you just answered a question. Appropriate motivation. Okay? Oh, where angels fear to tread. Yes, midshipman.
I'm going to go with motivated action guided by reason.
That's great. Adam, give me an example. Yeah, rubber hits a road.
I think a decent example of that is kind of like if I run into a conflict with, say, my spouse, I'm going to look at what the motivating reason is behind my conflict. Why am I upset? Why is she upset? And what action can I do to resolve both of our motivations for being upset?
Very good. Excellent answer, Adam.
Thank you. Ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Good job. Okay, now, I have to say that is correct. But, here's another example, right? If I am giving something to, we'll go back to Laura. I'm sorry, it's not over. It's not over. If I give you a birthday cake just because I want to ingratiate myself with you, okay? Just because I want to suck up, okay? I want something good from you. That's not virtuous, okay? It's got to be the right reason. It's got to be genuine concern for your birthday. Laura, you're a great woman. You're tremendous. You're my friend. I want to do something to make you happy. I bake you a cake, okay? And it isn't like, Laura, I'm baking you a cake because next week I'm going to ask you for a big loan, right? Okay, because that is not virtuous. So I want to make sure that we're clear that you have to be appropriately motivated. Everybody clear on that? Good. Okay. Should we do Hearst House, Ed? All right. Okay, should we do virtue? No. Okay, should we do this? Yeah, okay, we'll do this. All right, now, virtue ethics has long been on a quest for a criterion for virtue ethical right action, okay? Right, so what is it that makes an action right? And Hearst House proposed this. An action is right if and only if it is what a virtuous agent would characteristically, that is, acting in character, do in the circumstances. So you want to be virtuous. We'll just presume that you want to be virtuous, and you're in a situation where you don't know what to do, okay? Now, you ask yourself this question. Let's just say you know what virtue you need to have here, okay? And we'll just pick a virtue. Hello. Have I talked to you yet? Good.
Virtue. Integrity.
Good job. Excellent. Integrity. So you're in a situation, you're Paparo 21?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Paparo 21. You're in a situation that requires a decision of integrity. You don't know what to do. You ask yourself a question. What is the question you ask, Paparo 21?
What would a virtuous person do?
You're a bright young man.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. What would a person of integrity do? That's the question you're asking.
A person of integrity would act in a way that demonstrates integrity. So
That's good. It's not terribly informative, but we're getting there. What is integrity?
integrity is acting in a way in which the things that you do and the things that you say are consistent.
Okay. Now, all right, is that yet a moral virtue? Answer is no. You know why? I could have terrible values. I could have really terrible, I'm neglecting this side of the room, I'm sorry. I could really have terrible values, okay? I could think it's great to kill civilians. We should just go out there and do that. Okay, now that's a terrible value. Trust me, I know this. Okay, that is a terrible thing to do, but if my beliefs and actions are consistent with that, I have integrity in a very thin sense, the sense of consistency. But I'd say you really need to have integrity to values that are right, values that matter. That's what I'd say. So what are your deepest principles and values? Who else can I pick on? What other midshipmen? Yes, yes. Yes, I see midshipmen.
I'd say love and courage.
Love and courage, great. What do you do to have integrity with respect to those?
Right.
What do you do?
I think that every day you should be acting in a selfless way to help the people that you love.
Okay. Do you ever help people you don't love?
I tend to think I love everybody.
Well, good answer. Very good. Very good. Okay. Yeah, but what if there's somebody you really don't like?
I think then you have to have an understanding that liking someone and loving someone are very different, and you need to respect their humanity by still treating them well.
Good, good. So you can have integrity with respect to your values, right? Good job, good job. Okay, so here's the deal. When we don't know what to do, right, we can fill in a little bit about, what the virtuous person would do, what the person of integrity would do, okay? And, apparently your midshipmen are onto this. Very good. All right, now, one criticism of this view comes from a guy named Robert Johnson, who wrote in the journal Ethics in 2003. And the thing that is striking here that I'd like to call to your attention is that sometimes what the virtuous person would do is not really what it would be right for us to do if we are seeking to improve, okay? So this rests on the very plausible idea that we're not perfect in virtue. Okay? And sometimes, for example, if we have trouble with a particular virtue, we might need to take action that a virtuous person would not have to do, right? So the example that he gives is somebody who is prone to lie and realizes that about herself and takes action to improve, okay? She keeps a journal. She keeps a log of when she lies and starts to analyze it and say, well, why do I lie here? Is it because I'm feeling peer pressure? Is it because I feel that I have to pump myself up? I'm feeling insecure. So she diagnoses the various reasons for her lying and tries to address it, okay? A truly honest person would not have to do this. But she does. So this is right action for her, although it is not right action for the truly virtuous person. And so this is one of the issues that has plagued this notion of trying to come up with a criterion for virtue ethical right action. And debates continue to rage about this. But you see the point, right? That sometimes in the course of developing virtue or trying to improve in a virtue, we need to do things that a fully virtuous person would not have to do. And I want to say that the things we need to do are indeed right. So I'm going to skip the unity of virtue stuff. Ethical naturalism, no. Ed's saying no. Do we need to do Russell? No. My own view here? Whoa, okay. No, I don't think we need to do that. No, I don't know what universities. Oh, intelligent virtue, here I think we do need to do some work, okay? And this is because Julia Annis was writing on the development of virtue, okay? And what she said, what her insight was, and Annis is alive. I mean, these are not dead people, except for a couple of them. Okay, but, okay. Annis says, developing virtue is like developing an intelligent practical skill. Okay? And this is something you might want to take on board in your thinking about military formation. Okay? So the example she gives is really like learning to play a piano. Okay? And the two key features are the need to learn and the drive to aspire. Okay? So if you need to learn something, you're interested in learning how to play the piano, you need to learn this. Okay? You can learn at a very low level. But the drive to aspire takes you further, right? It makes you someone who is not satisfied with rote routines or mere mimicry, But, you know, the serious person wants to develop a style of her own. The analogy was seriously learning to play the piano here. So you might start out wanting to be like your hero. You might start out wanting to have the courage of Admiral Stockdale or Senator McCain. But along the way, you're going to become you, right? You're going to become your own individual, okay? And so she thinks that the articulacy requirement is this. The learner of virtue needs to be able to say something about what she's learning. Otherwise, you're not getting it, right? You're not getting it at all. And that's why I'm asking these midshipmen to say something about virtue, okay? That's one of the reasons why it's kind of entertaining, and I like torturing people. That's another reason, okay? Mild, moderate torture. Nothing big, okay? So, you know, you have to be able to say something about what you're learning when you're learning virtue to make sure that you're getting it right. Okay, now, this is, I think, the last slide on neo-Aristotelianism, and this is a new work, came out in 2018, trying to offer an analysis of virtues that Aristotle didn't talk about, one of which is awe. Right? It's a really interesting virtue, but Aristotle apparently didn't have much time for emotions connected with transcendent experiences. And that's what's going on here, right? That there might be experiences in your life that are awe-inspiring. And I'm sure that in military practice and in military history, I mean, we've heard some of these today. We've heard the story of the Lance Corporal. We've heard the story of the engagement with the MiGs. These are awe-inspiring. Think of it. 25-year-olds, youngsters, are making these really sophisticated decisions that turn out to be right? Okay, and not by accident. Okay. So how can we think about some of these emotions? So there are some alternatives to neo-Aristotelian virtue ethics, and Ed has already warned me off some of these. So one thing that I want to, how are we doing on time, by the way? Okay. Oh, we're good. We're good. Okay, now here's a most recent work from my colleague Linda Zagzewski, and she has pioneered what's called exemplarist moral theory. So this is the idea that one way of cultivating virtue is to find an exemplar. Okay, an exemplarist theory. There's a lot of theoretical stuff here. But, you know, she identifies figures such as Confucius, Jesus Christ, and others as exemplars of moral goodness through our feelings of admiration for them. So we figure out who exemplars are through feelings of admiration. I'm on the prowl here for more midshipmen. Hello. Anderson 20. Whom do you admire?
It's a big question, but a little obscure. I read a book called It On Like Thunder, and there's an aviator in there named Bill Squire Evans, and he's been my kind of hero since I was a plebe.
Why?
He has one specific quote where he talks about the courage of his peers, and he was someone who kind of flew under the radar, but the things he did as a part of a greater unit were pretty exceptional. And the way that he reflected on the contributions he and his peers made to history were pretty impactful on me.
Great, thank you. And who might you be? Taylor. Hello.
Hello.
Whom do you admire, Taylor?
I admire my father, ma'am.
Why is that?
He's really honest and kind of the most respectable person I've ever met.
Good job, Taylor. Good job to both of you. Okay, so you see that exemplarism is really, it's a cool theory in many ways. It's theoretically very well developed, but it has an intuitive appeal, right? And when you ask people who they admire, they will tell you why, which is a great thing. And I really am proud of your midshipmen for the way that they answered the question. Taylor, in particular, you said, I admire my father because he's honest, right? You don't admire your father just because he's your father, although you might, but you admire him for your honesty. And you want to be like him, I presume, for his honesty, right? Because if your father was dishonest, would you want to be dishonest? No, see, that's the trick. That's the trick. You got to find an exemplar who has qualities worth admiring and worth emulating. So this, I think, is a tremendous tool for the military. You've got heroes. You have people who are worthy of your admiration. You can start developing virtue by saying, what is it about those people that I admire? Why do I want to be like them? How am I going to be honest? How am I going to do things in connection with my unit, right? How am I going to transcend myself and be a soldier or sailor with others, right? So those are the kinds of things that we need to pick up on and develop, I think, in military training. So we don't want to go to direct reference. Trust me, I know this. Okay, but what we can do is say the good person is that, right? You don't have to know the characteristics at first, right? So you might be able to say, well, you know, Jesus Christ, there's a good person. And later you think about, well, why? Right? So we have this idea through admiration that this is what the good person is. And then later on we discover more about them, about what makes them good, and attempt to develop that in ourselves. And we can do this in various ways, through psychology, through narrative, scientific study, for example. I cannot remember your name. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes. Caden. Okay. Hayden. Thank you. Thank you. So sorry. Thank you. Hayden. What's that? Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, Hayden, you talked about a book, and this is a narrative. Taylor talked about someone she knows in her own life. So there are many ways in which we learn about exemplars, right? Communities. This is another area where the military is very important, because a community can help to guide your admiration, right? You know, it can help to shape whom you admire and in what way and how. Okay. All right, so I was going to do social distortions of social articulations of morality. Yes, no, no. I think we're on a roll here, don't you? Okay, all right, so I had a few little things here. Here's what I want to say, okay? You will probably recognize this, at least some of you. The U.S. military personnel are sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution, and here's the oath of enlistment. I, blank, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. What does this mean? I want to make to you an argument for the extensive ethics education, in particular character formation in the military. Okay, and here's how it goes. In a democracy such as ours, in which military personnel are sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution, military institutions have an obligation to include intensive ethics education, and of course my preference is for virtue and character in military education and training. This is because the military serves and defends the rule of law, not the rule of men. This is what makes the U.S. military different from the military in Nazi Germany, from the military in Latin American dictatorships, from the military in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, from the military in totalitarian regimes. The United States military is sworn to uphold the Constitution and democratic principles as enshrined in that document, okay? So there is a higher call here. You're not serving at the behest of any single person. You are serving at the behest of your country, all right? So, since it's the but the rule of law is only as good as the people who uphold it. Since it's a sworn duty of military personnel to uphold the rule of law, military institutions are obligated to form the characters of military personnel so they are able to do this and do it well. This formation must include extensive ethics education, which I believe is a mandate, not an option, in our democratic society. I want to say also, to connect with the points made earlier about body armor. Character as body armor. By enlisting in the military, you deliberately put yourself in harm's way. You're deliberately doing that. But you're doing that within the context of an institution, the military that is sworn to uphold and defend democracy. And I think is obligated to give you the training you need, not only to be good soldiers in combat and good leaders, but to be good people and to be able to withstand not just the physical injuries you may incur, but the moral injuries you may incur. So for that reason, I think ethics education is mandatory in the military. So I had concluded here with some examples, but we've already gone through those. So I'd like to conclude with a thank you to the Admiral Stockdale Center, to the McCain Conference, to Ed Barrett and Mitt Regan, and to those of you in the audience, especially the midshipmen, who put up with my questions and answered so beautifully. Thank you. Do we have questions? Time for questions? 15 minutes. I've got a bunch of them. Look at all this. Okay, so I think you have microphones here, but let's get my midshipman here. I'm taking possession.
Good morning, ma'am. General Whistler mentioned in his speech that characters reset every day. Now, you referenced characters reset every day.
Yeah.
Now, you referenced Johnson, who claimed that in cases of moral growth, the action might be different than in cases of a person who is already completely virtuous. Now, in the military, when we're talking about signals propagation, we use a concept of black box to represent an ideal system. Would you say that this concept of a virtual person is sort of like a philosophical black box? Is this a theoretical ideal that can never actually be obtained? Or do you assert that you actually can become truly ideal and reach a sort of eudaimonia in terms of your virtuism as an individual?
That's a great question, Adam. Thank you very much. First of all, it isn't eudaimonia, as cool as that sounds. It's eudaimonia. Eudaimonia. Yes, you will. Trust me, I know this. Say it now. Eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia.
You got it on the first try. I'm telling you. Okay, I think that's a really great question. And I don't know about the black box too much. I mean, you went into some of the technical language there that I'm not good at. But I think we might not attain an ideal because we are, after all, imperfect. But we can try, right? You can give it your best shot you've got. And you can improve in virtue so that, you might start out not being as courageous as you want. But then after you have been through several situations which call for courage, you develop courage a little bit more. There's an ancient saying, I don't know where it comes from, put your head in the lion's mouth. Just put your head in that lion's mouth and see what happens. You're going to surprise yourself, right? You'll get better at it. You just said, Adam, I'll never get eudaimonia. And yet you did it, right? So I'd say we might not attain an ideal, but we can certainly improve. Does that answer your question? I think that some other folks had their hands up. There's a gentleman there's several over here, there's one back here. I don't know where to go. Ed? Oh, I can pick. Okay, well, I don't know. I don't know where to go. I'm just going to spin around here. You're close.
Thank you, Chapman Rogers. I'm out from Coronado. Couple questions. One is in the exemplarist, they're kind of related, exemplarist moral theory. What if you've got a skewed moral compass, right? Then you're most likely to choose that moral example that's slightly off. Yeah. How do you combat that? And sort of related, or just another one to ask, is you talked also about being rightly motivated, right? And I deal with this with the guys I work with. Right. Okay, great. So we've got some virtues to strive for. How do I get that motivation in the right place? Yeah. Because they may or may not have that right motivation.
Right. Thank you. You're a chaplain? Great questions. So, I mean, who do you admire, right? And we can be mistaken in so many ways. But, Zagzebski thinks that communities can help correct us. So, I mean, there's total importance here in terms of the community, the people you hang around with, your family, right, to provide good guidance in case you make bad choices. And so that there are correctives that are there, right, to be used, but you have to be willing to hear them and heed them, okay? So that's one point. Another point, these are related, it concerns right motivation. Again, the importance of the family can't be understated. The importance of your friends, the importance of colleagues. As a chaplain, the chaplains are absolutely crucial. That's why I picked on Laura. I mean, they're absolutely crucial. Right? And I had the pleasure of meeting the head of the European chaplaincy over here. It's a tremendous responsibility, but it is a responsibility to provide moral anchors in cases where there is a lot of imperfection. And at the end of the day, everybody has to be able to look in the mirror and say, who is the person I want to be? Can I be this person who is motivated simply to ingratiate myself with other people? Can I be this kind of person? Or do I want to be a person like the general's father, who was not concerned with the external trappings of a medal or a patent, but wanted something deeper in life? Those are the big questions. Okay. I think we had a couple. Does that help any? Yeah, sort of. I mean, I don't have silver bullets here. I'm sorry. Well, all my bullets are cubic zirconium.
This is a question for the midshipmen that they probably won't ask, but I'd like to ask it too. One book that they should have, not only to read now, but to reread, say, every year or 2 years as they progress through this development of their virtuous lives, that they will get something different every time because it will have different impact to them. What's that book as far as you're concerned? It's a hard question, I know.
Yeah, thanks for the softball there. I think the book for me has been a book by a Buddhist, and her name is Pema Chodron, and it's called When Things Fall Apart. Heart Advice for Difficult Times, When Things Fall Apart. And it's the kind of book, it's a very small book. It's something you need to read in very small chunks and then put down and think about. But it has been very good for me for a couple of reasons. I'll just share those with you briefly, and I do have some other questions. But one reason is that, you know, as a philosopher, I'm, of course, neurotic. It goes with the territory. I don't speak for others. I'm simply speaking for myself. There could be well-adjusted philosophers here. But, you know, the thing is, like many people today, I overthink, right? And part of this is what you might call anticipatory anxiety, right? So it's like, how can things go wrong? Okay, let's try to plan this out. How many things can go wrong? And Pema Chodron has something in her book that has been very helpful for me, because she says when you get into those cycles, when you're spinning your wheels, you're churning, she just says, say, thinking. This is just thinking. It's not actuality. None of this has happened yet. Thinking, turn it off. I found that very helpful. The other thing that I found helpful, and I'm probably messing this up, but it's a form of meditation, and it's a breathing meditation, and it's when you take in the good and expel the bad. Breathing in good, expelling bad. But it's a way of focusing your attention and your concentration so that you don't get too involved with what's going on around you, and you're able to maintain a stable center. Now, for me, of course, I mean, I have to say, my ability to meditate is really must be contextualized within my overall neuroticism. And so, you know, one can have better or worse luck with this. But I would think, you know, if you want to do meditation classes as part of ethics, that's a good way to start. And it always helps students, it always helps children in grade school to start off with maybe 5 or 10 minutes of just being calm. This is in the Buddhist tradition, but there are ways of doing this in Christian traditions. I taught at Marquette University in Milwaukee, which is Jesuit, for 25 years, and there was a priest there who used to start prayers by saying, we put ourselves in God's presence. And that's a calming effect. You realize that there is a greater dimension here that is around you and with you. So those are some techniques that have helped me. There's another midshipman. You mind if I get the midshipman, sir? Or do you want to go first? I'm going to let him go. Hang on, I'll be right there. I want to make sure You're welcome.
It was very good.
Thank you. Can you,
Enjoyed it and learned a lot.
can you
I
hear?
look forward to the slides so I can have a reading list. Traditional military ethics is divided into jus ad bellum and jus in bello. as
Yeah.
You surely know. It's easy to see how virtue theory can be applied directly to jus in bello. We're dealing there with the decisions and actions of individual human beings. In the case of jus ad bellum, though, there's a problem right away. The actor is a state. And so eudaimonia and desire, and so all those complications that feed into virtue theory don't seem to apply. And in fact, if we look at courage as a virtue for states, I'd rather they didn't have it, because there are many foolhardy wars. Unlike personal violence, which I'd avoid like the plague, states apparently have a predilection toward violence and attack. So how does it apply to jus ad bellum?
Thank you for that question. Another softball. I would have to think about that long and hard. And, you know, the area of virtue politics is now starting to develop. And the area of neo-Aristotelian social theory is starting to develop. I think when you talk about states, there's are levels of complexity there that are not in evidence with people. And as with people, you know, a trait can be directed toward an end that is not a good. In those cases, I don't think that trait is a virtue. And, you know, others may disagree. Philosophers have disagreed. But I'm going to have to pass on any kind of decent answer to your question, because I just haven't thought about it in sufficient detail to be able to give you a good answer. And I think the question deserves one. So, like you and others, I'm going to have to join the parade of people who are still thinking about this, and to invoke my good friend Nancy Sherman. But others have thought about this a lot more deeply than I have, and so I'll have to pass to those folks. So I apologize for that. Okay, midshipman? Okay, there are a couple more. Can there be a couple more? Yes.
Short.
Ignore him.
So, good morning, Dr. Snow. My name is Midshipman Anthony Perry. One of the previous questions, you said that the community is responsible for resetting an individual's wrong moral compass.
I didn't say that. Go ahead.
However, what happens whenever the community does not have the correct moral standards?
Oh my gosh. Let's end it now, because I'm getting pilloried here. These are great questions. What did you say your name was? Anthony, good question. Fabulous question. What happens when the community gets it wrong? You know, and this is kind of like the previous question, what happens when the state gets it wrong, right? So, I mean, you guys are just pushing the ball up orders of magnitude. Somewhere, sometime, there's going to have to be a corrective, right? And I guess it depends on whether you think, ultimately, that relativism is the order of the day, or whether you think that there are objective moral truths, right? I happen to think there are objective moral truths, and that we can judge the standards and norms of communities that diverge from those, right? And I happen to think those moral truths are based on human nature. So I'm a pretty traditional neo-Aristotelian kind of gal, and that's how I self-identify, you know. Traditional neo-Aristotelian kind of gal, okay. And so the human nature, right, there are some fundamental truths about how we are as human beings that I think can form correctives to certain community practices. So that would be the tip of an iceberg of an answer for you. Does that satisfy you in any way, shape, or form? Okay, thank you. They're so much easier than some of the others. Okay, Dodds, 19.
Yes, ma'am. You briefly mentioned the impact of society on virtues. Some complications may arise when different cultures prioritize different virtues, justice versus mercy, for example, that are not necessarily more or less right. As members of the military, can you speak to how our integrity might be challenged as we try to build peace in other countries and how we can judge morality in these cross-cultural situations? Please.
Thank you very much. I should have taken your advice, Ed. These questions are they're just blockbusters. Hang on. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to give you a shot. All right, Dodds. Do you think you know the difference between right and wrong?
For myself, yes.
Okay, but now, I guess that I have these sorts of questions often for my undergraduates. It's not as pressing as you deal with in the military context, because you need to go to very different cultures, and you are going to experience very different values and norms. You're going to experience different interpretations of those values and norms. You need to respect them, but you also need to draw lines at some point. Yes, and the question is where? Now, I do not have an answer for this. It's a time-honored professorial privilege of not having an answer to questions, other than to say, phronesis, right? Okay, you're going to have to make hard decisions, probably on a case-by-case basis, or maybe then on the basis of that to formulate a rule about what is permissible and what isn't in certain kinds of contexts, in areas in which you do have legitimate jurisdiction or authority. Okay? There may be practices over which you have no authority. There may be practices that we don't like, okay? That we in our Western culture don't like. But if we have no legitimate moral authority, there's not a lot we can do. We certainly cannot use force to stop those practices. We might be able to engage in dialogue and debate to try to persuade people to come over to our position. But there are certain things, and certainly as a member of the military, okay, you need to use your force carefully and your authority carefully. And I really don't know what else to say about that. I mean, there are practices in other cultures that I think are quite wrong. Genital mutilation, female genital mutilation is one of them, right? And I have no moral authority to go to a family that's doing this and say, quit, stop, okay? I could try to engage them in discussion. It could be very difficult, okay? There could be practices that you encounter, as a military person over which you have no jurisdiction. And then there's not a lot you can actually do to stop those practices, right? You could engage in debate again, but I'm not sure what else to tell you about this. There's some things over which we don't have control, right? Thanks for that question. It was great. Okay.
Well, unfortunately, we'll have to cut it off there, and I think we can all agree that was not boring. So, thank you. Your 30 years of teaching really show, and for your generosity in coming here, and we wanted to present you with the coveted Stockdale Moral Compass, which I suggest should remind you of all the students you've formed over the 30-plus years of your teaching. Thank you. Can I borrow this? Can I have those? No. Okay. So we will go on a short break. When you hear the bell,